We are going to learn tonight a special shiur on the topic of going to secular courts, part 2. And a very interesting question I'm going to start with that Rabbi Shalom Messas was asked, and a different approach also this week from Malach Rabbi Rafael Ankawa. We mentioned a halacha that he said last week, but this week we're gonna mention a new halacha. The case of Rabbi Shalom Messas is the following. It's found in Shemesh Umagen Chelek Gimel Choshen Mishpat Siman Aleph, and he says like this. He was asked that there was a building company in Beitar who built many buildings, a building company in Beitar that built many buildings. And after they finished building the buildings, they realized that the quality, the ones who bought and invested in this, they realized the quality of the buildings was not so good. So they really were buying a $250,000 apartment. It was only worth $200,000. They used cheaper materials in Beitar. They used cheaper materials, and they used in Chedera the same thing, and a bunch of and all the balconies are full. Oh, there's a similar story. So they wanted to know the following. So these are all religious Jews, right? But the big company is a non-religious company, and they had a clause in there that any machloket, any fight that there is going to be, automatically it goes to the courts. They don't deal with Bet Din. They don't want to deal with Bet Din. Any fights that we have goes to the courts. So now the tenants, or not the tenants, more accurately, the ones who bought the different apartments over here, have a complaint against this company, that this company wants to sold them something that's deficient. So in courts, it would be a slam dunk win in the case of the people who bought the properties. There's proofs. There's nothing they can do about it. But unfortunately, this big company had its own consultants, and those consultants said, go to Bet Din, because in Bet Din there's damages called grama. We're not going to learn about it in this Get Out of the Cold. We're going to learn about this whole Bet Din process, but they're not going to learn about this specifically. This is a detail in it. But there is a halacha called grama. Grama means indirect damages. In the Torah, indirect damages you cannot collect from, which means that over here it's a classic case of a grama, of an indirect damage. You are only being damaged from the fact that eventually you can't sell it at the right amount. Good question. I guess it wasn't a mekach taor in that case. So this famous company knew that they had the halacha on their side, that the Bet Din would have to say it's grama, and then they're going to be exempt. So all of a sudden, the company said, we only want to go to Bet Din. And the tenants, who are all, or not the tenants, the ones who bought the apartments, who are all religious, saying, they're not gonna. If someone wants to go to Bet Din, they have no right to refuse. They're not, even though it said it in the clause. They know that there's a prohibition of going to secular court, so they were going to follow through with that. So basically, the big company, the giant, really is taking major advantage of the smaller tenants, and they are how do we call it? They are using the situation to their benefit. So that was the question that was asked to Rabbi Shalom Messas. Is there any option whatsoever for the tenants to be able to, I wouldn't call them tenants, I'm sorry, I'm not calling them tenants, for the buyers to be able to defend themselves? So Rabbi Shalom Messas has the following question. What happens if two Jews agree that they're going to go to Bet Din, and they will ask the Bet Din to judge according to the common secular law and principles that are relevant in that specific area of law? Is that binding or not? So there is a very big discussion about this in the Acharonim, and believe it or not, many Acharonim are of the opinion. He brings down the Sefer Bala Tirumot and the Rosh that discussed this, and they seem to say it's dependent on the following question. We have a halacha of Kol Tnai Shebimamon Tnau Kayam. you can make any condition, even if it's a condition against the Torah, and by monetary laws, it's binding. For example, a regular condition that you do against the Torah, a simple example is, I want to make a t'nai that non-kosher chazir, non-kosher pig is kosher. So no batil, you can't do anything about it. You can't make a condition against the Torah that he's going to eat non-kosher food. I mean, I'm going to eat pig. That's not called a condition. That's not binding. It doesn't have any validity whatsoever. But let's say somebody says the following. The Gemara in Masechet Makot gives the following case. We know that after Shemitah, all loans are nullified. So the Gemara makes a distinction. If you say the following, if one says, I am making a condition that after Shemitah, Shemitah will not take care of my loan, will not nullify the loan, that's nothing, because Shemitah does nullify the loan. But let's say you say, I want to make a condition that Shemitah will not nullify my loan. Not that it doesn't nullify loans, but in my specific case, I will still be obligated to pay. The Gemara says over there, T'na'o kayam. Then the condition is valid, because you could always make a condition in monetary, because you're not going against the Torah. You're just going to say, I accept upon myself to pay. So there's a question over here: is one allowed to say that even though grama, in this case, grama is patur, but we want to accept upon ourselves to pay if that is what the regular practice is. Is that considered Tanao Kayam or not? So the Sefer Sma says not only you're allowed to make a condition, you're allowed to go to Beddin, but even if you want to make a condition with your friend that both of you sign, we will both go to a court that is going to rule that according to their laws, even though there's a prohibition going to secular court, but if both of you agree, the Sma seems to say that it would be permitted. The Taz asks, what do you mean? Going to secular courts, how could that be permitted? So the Sefer Birkei Yosef of Maran Achida, the Chida says, Rav Chaim Yosef David Asulai discusses this, and he says that, why is it not the same?
Because the one that built don't want to go to court.
But it says in the contract that they both signed on a contract that they were going to secular court. So you can't go back on your word of secular court. That's going to be the trick over here. That's going to be the way to. That's what Rabbi Shalom Messas is going to suggest. So over here, the case is that, so there is a machloket. Let's say you're allowed to sign to go to secular court. Both you agree that you will accept upon yourself whatever ruling. So even though there's generally a prohibition to go to secular court, but when you make a kinyan, when you make a halachic binding agreement with a kinyan, with solidifying it in a binding way, so then it could be that you will accept upon yourself whatever the secular law is, not because the secular law is better than the law of the Torah, Chas v'Shalom, but you accept upon yourself by monetary laws to go according to that. The Taz asks, what you're going to say, it doesn't matter, you're still going to secular law, that's forbidden. But says the Birkei Yosef, in a case where you're going to go to a Jewish court, and you're making a Tanai that both of you agree, the defendant and the plaintiff both agree that you're going to judge according to whatever the custom is by the secular law, then he says that's allowed. And Rabbi Shalom brings a slew of acharonim who are posek this way. The Sefer Atumim, the Bnei Shmuel, the Maritatz, the Maras Hason, the Rosh Yosef, the Tashbetz, says that this was the minhag in Sfarad, and others that say this way. He says furthermore that he found in the end of the Sefer Karnei Re'em of Rabbi Rafael and Kawa. Rabbi Rafael and Kawa, besides being a great tzaddik, known as Rabbi Rafael, he was very well known for his in the department of Chosh and Mishpat, of monetary laws. He was the Dayan originally in the city of Saleh, and then he became the Dayan in Rabat, which is the capital of Morocco already in his time. He didn't live that long ago, the capital of Morocco, and he was actually really the address to go to on any monetary issues whatsoever. Last week we discussed a similar question with him. I remember I remember that that in the shul in Los Angeles they honored me by a dinner. So I told you this. So they gave me a nice plaque, a nice golden rimmed plaque with George Bush inside, picture of George Bush with signature. Thank you very much. I guess it came from his office. I don't think he really wrote it. But I was very happy because I took that picture of George Bush. I posted it with Ribi and his beautiful frame. I think George has something on me because ever since I moved, I can't find it. It's somewhere where I can't find. But there is somewhere in the world that behind George Bush, in front of it, there's Lehavdil ben Kodesh Lechol, there's Ribi Kawa. Either way, he writes in the end of the Sefer Karnei Re'em, one of his Sfarim, he writes a very similar halacha. He says, Mi shehetne im chavero shelo yadun bedini Israel ela bedini akum. You make a deal with your friend that you are going to go according to the secular law. Im hu mamon shemutar liYisrael ladun alav yadun bedini Israel v'yadinu oto kedino akum. If it is something that is permitted to deal with, he says, then you're allowed to do that. V'imu mamon she'asur l'den Israel ladun alav. What's mamon that a Yisrael can't deal with? Like a loan that the Shemitah went on. Okay, so this, he says an example, not like what we said. He said a loan that Shemitah passed, so that's it. You can't do anything about it. Now, he says over there, even they didn't make a kinyan, they didn't make a binding agreement. But if you made a kinyan, it says Rabbi Shalom over here, signing is considered a binding kinyan. And I don't care that the company wants to say now, oh, we want to be big tzaddikim and we want to go according to the regular courts. They signed an agreement that they will go to secular court, so you could at least hold that binding that you want to go according to secular law. And says Rabbi Shalom, you're allowed to bring them to Bedin to go according to secular law, which will rule in cases of grama that you're obligated, because they originally said in their contract that they will deal according to those laws. It's a very novel approach, and this is how he's posek halacha le'maaseh. The truth is, we started discussing last week different instances when somebody is going to be able to go to secular court. We learned last week that there was a prohibition of going to secular court. And we also mentioned that if it's going to be a non-Jewish arbitration, which is not non-Jewish courts, but non-Jewish arbitration, the minhag is to be lenient. That was also psak from Ribi Kawa, that the minhag is to be lenient. Something that happens quite often, and it's actually relevant now to the ice storm, is let's say your friend's tree, some people's tree fell during the storm, fell on your car and damaged your car. So you want to bring him to Beddin, right? And you want to bring him to Beddin. Now, if you would bring your neighbor to Beddin, you're not allowed to bring him to Beddin because, first of all, you could bring him to Beddin, but Beddin will probably say you're patur because it's a grama, it's not your fault, etc. But you don't want to go to him. You want to go to his insurance company. That's where you want to go after. So the insurance is in place. It's like the guarantor. It's in place of the person itself. Is that considered is that considered like you are going to you're taking a Jew to court and then the insurance is in the back, or you're taking a non-Jew to non-Jewish court, which that's always allowed. So many poskim are of the opinion that since the insurance is the main guarantor for the person, you could go directly to the insurance. You don't need permission from the Bet Din to go because the insurance is in place of the actual person. So anytime that a Jew damages another Jew, say, oh, you have to bring me to Bet Din. That's not true. I could go to your insurance because your insurance is in your place. Your insurance is the same person paying. So I could go directly after your insurance, and that would be allowed. And I think that's the common practice. I think that's the common practice. There's another very practical application where one would be allowed to go to secular courts, which unfortunately this is something that's quite abused. And I'm wondering that this Wednesday we're having a Get Out of the Cult program. We're going to discuss about the process of the Bet Din. And Rabbi Lowy, Dayan in Dayan over here, is going to speak about that, about what choices you have when you receive a summons. What do? How do you respond? The week after that, on Wednesday, January 1st, we're gonna have a shiur from Rabbi Yasayag on when one is allowed to go to secular courts, because there's a prohibition of going to secular courts, a very serious prohibition. And not only of course nowadays, that not only that, the halacha is that if you take your friend to secular court and you're not supposed to get that money you get from him, and the secular court gives you that money, but according to Din Torah, you weren't supposed to get that money, and you weren't allowed to go, that money that you received, read my lips, is called gezel. Is called gezel. The tashbet, yes, the tashbet, Rabbi Shimon ben Tzemach from Algeria in the 1500s writes not only that, if you take that money and you betroth a woman with it, you're mekadesh and isha, then you take that money and you say, Hared mikudeshet li beketzev zeh, it's not a kiddushin. The lady is still not an esh, she can marry anybody else she wants. That means it's just to illustrate the point, it's not your money. It's not called your money. That's the prohibition. That's the prohibition of going to secular court, is that serious. But there are different times where there are different heterim where you'd be allowed to go to secular court. What's one of those cases? So this case is brought down in the Sefer. They learned it from the Sefer Tumim. There's really a Shirut Teshuvot Maharsham and Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, who actually lived on Palm Drive in the house that Shlomo Kadosh over here is living in, right? He said the following. He said a chidush like this, that any time where I'm not bringing somebody to court because of a judgment issue, I'm just bringing him to collect something that is obviously mine. We call it in the Lashon of the Poskim a hov barur, a clear debt. In that case, one for sure could go to Arkaut, doesn't even need permission from Beit Din in that case. Why? Because I'm not going for a psak, I'm not going for a judgment, I'm going to them for enforcement. So if I lend a Jew money, I lend him $10,000 and he's not paying back, it's a clear chov. I have the shtar over here. There's no question about it. I would be able to go to secular court. But you have to ask your Rav, what the details are. Because many people will say, well, any invoice I have that's a chov over. The other person, maybe the reason why they didn't pay back the invoice, the chov, is because they feel that you sent them faulty products. And you know that, but you're still saying, I want to go to secular. Only a person knows really himself if it's really called a chov barur or not. But I heard last week I spoke to a very prominent dayan in New York. He said, yes, if it's something that according to the judgment of the case, the dayanim will tell you themselves. You could ask a question to the dayanim and they'll tell you, yes, if it's something that's clearly owed to you and there's no question, it's black on white, it's not a gray area, that's not called that you're going for a judgment, you're going to collect something, a chov barur, again, as we call it, then it would be permitted. Then it would be permitted. That's another practical case. But sometimes the guy doesn't want to pay just because he doesn't want to pay you now. He feels that he could push you off, and you need the money now, and you don't know what to do. That's the case, I guess, of chov barur. But you're right. Any other case that would require Beit Din, and you'd have to go to Beit Din. Now, if you see that he doesn't want to go to Beit Din after 3 times, and then you get permission from the Beit Din. That's what we're going to learn this Wednesday. And then you get a summons, and then the summons eventually is going to lead to that the guy doesn't want to go, and the Beit Din is going to say, okay, you have permission to go to court. Why is there a permission to go to secular courts? That's already a question. If there's an isur in the Torah, there's a prohibition to go to court of goyim. So why all of a sudden you're permitted? It's like you have to keep Shabbat, but if it's too hard, so if you can't not keep Shabbat, let's say you have to work, so you're allowed to violate Shabbat. There's no such thing. So over here too. Well, if the guy doesn't want to go to court, so go to secular courts. What do you mean? If the guy doesn't want to go to bed, go to secular courts. If there's an isur to go to secular courts, why should that be permissive? So the Kli Hamda and others explain that the parameters of going to secular court is not that you were going to them for a judgment. When you're going to them for a judgment, then it's a chilul Hashem. Or are you going against the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu and you're going to secular courts? But when it's because the guy is refusing to go to courts with you and he is running away with your money, you're just trying to save your money. You're not going to the secular court for a judgment. The lashon of the Rambam is you're just trying to save your money. In that case, there's never a prohibition said. The Rambam says, you're just saving the money from the person who wants to take it away from you. That wouldn't be a prohibition because you're not going against the parameters of the prohibition is going for a judgment. But when you're going just to save your money, that's not called the parameters of the prohibition, and that's why it should be allowed. Okay, so we learned, yeah.
What kind of civil courts do that the Beit Din can't in terms of enforcement?
It depends, because the Beit Din, if by the Beit Din you sign a binding arbitration, that's enforceable in law, and you could bring a binding intervention anywhere. That's fine. But sometimes the courts are scarier. I don't know. For a person who gets a, are you allowed to send a lawyer letter, even if you don't have the intention of bringing the person to secular courts, but you want to send them your lawyer's letter to scare them? Also, the poskim say that it should be allowed because you're not sending with the intention of bringing him to secular court. You're using it as a scare, but you're not going in there for their judgment. So that also lechora should be allowed. So these are some practical applications where secular court applies. Once again, we discussed the case of Rabbi Shalom Messas and the psak of Rabbi Refael Ankoa. Chazak u'baruch.